Thank you again for joining me for the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are here on day 137 for Saturday, May 16th, 2020, focusing on 2 Chronicles 35 through 36. We will wrap up the narrative arc that went from 1 Samuel all the way through 2 Chronicles, and we will hear a retelling of the fall of Jerusalem. So in 2 Chronicles 35, we see that life comes quickly. We'll feature the celebration of the Passover here, which is a remembrance of the freedom from slavery in Egypt. And then we'll see the fall of Judah and Jerusalem in, quote, a return to slavery via Babylon. So moving on to King Josiah, we see that he restored worship of God in accordance with the book of the law. And that also means an important remembrance comes back, the Passover. And so the observance of the Passover is restored literally by the book, calling for people to be together on the 14th day of the first month. The ark is said to have been placed in the Temple of Solomon, which is a proper and fitting place for the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. So with that there, and with God's presence and blessing instilled in the temple, the king donates for the Passover 30,000 lambs and 3,000 bulls. So at great cost to himself, he is making sure that this observance happens. And his leaders follow and take suit, and they also give voluntarily to the Levites as well. So the sentiment is that everyone wants this Passover to be observed and to be a memorable Passover for years to come. It is very much so. It's documented here in the Bible as kind of the most abundant Passover that is celebrated. And so with the temple assistants in their places, the Passover is commemorated. In 2 Chronicles 35, verse 18, no Passover like it had been kept in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel. None of the kings of Israel had kept such a Passover as was kept by Josiah, by the priest and by the Levites, by all Judah and Israel who were present, and by the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This is a very special Passover, because it's not been celebrated as such for a long time. Now, with this celebration observed, we then enter into the story of the king of Egypt traveling through Judah to make war. Doubting that God had ordained Egypt to fight a different nation, King Josiah battles with Egypt to his death. In the battle, King Josiah is injured and later dies from the arrow wound that occurs in his body. It's also mentioned that the prophet Jeremiah records a lament for King Josiah. Now, this implicates the book called Lamentations, and though the focus of Lamentations is less on King Josiah and more on the fall of Judah and Jerusalem as a whole. So it's interesting how this all interplays together. But moving on to 2 Chronicles 36, with celebration turned into lamentation, King Jehoahaz replaces King Josiah and takes the throne for only 3 months. As he did to his father, Pharaoh fights Judah, and Jerusalem then falls to Pharaoh, and the king of Egypt enslaves Jehoahaz, making his brother Eliakim the puppet of Jerusalem. The author states that Pharaoh renames Eliakim to Jehoiakim, which further illustrates, I think, the power that that Egypt is putting upon Judah. He can change your name, he can change your identity, and so that's how it is recorded here, that the king of Egypt enslaves them both within a name as well, too. So this newly named King Jehoiakim rules, quote-unquote, wickedly, which means that he sins against God. He doesn't follow the laws of the book of God. And so he does this wickedness for 11 years before a man named King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon comes along. And this Babylonian replaces and repels Pharaoh as the new dictator in the area. So Jehoiakim is taken to Babylon, while Jehoahaz is in Egypt. And so you've got these leaders of Judah who are being taken away. Babylon now rules over the region of Judah, even taking the sacred objects of the temple of the Lord to Babylon. As we have the list from 2 Kings, it lists that they are the vessels of the house of the Lord, the treasures of the king's house, the skilled workers, warriors, and government officials, and the king and his family. The poor are said to remain in Jerusalem, and thus the newly appointed King Jehoiachin rules for 3 months and 10 days before he as well is taken to Babylon. A man named Zedekiah is then made the vassal king appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. So King Zedekiah, again, lasts 11 years. And just like those after King Josiah, he does what is evil in the sight of the Lord. He was a centerpiece for the dysfunction of Judah at this time, as it says in 2 Chronicles 36:14. All the leading priests and all the people were also exceedingly unfaithful, following all the abominations of the nations, and they polluted the house of the Lord that he had consecrated in Jerusalem. Now the Lord, the God of their ancestors, was sent persistently to them by his messengers, the prophets, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord against his people became so great that there was no remedy. So the Lord then sends Babylon to destroy Jerusalem. And after the destruction, the writer claims that all the forgotten Sabbath days are then observed. In 2 Chronicles 36:21, all the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. Thus, 2 Chronicle ends, but it ends on a hopeful note. A gentleman named King Cyrus of Persia comes and reverses what Babylon did and seeks to rebuild worship of God. Specifically, he seeks to rebuild the temple of the Lord. For this, Isaiah 45 calls King Cyrus an agent of God, specifically a Messiah, an anointed one. God delivers salvation through his anointed Cyrus, as it says in there in 2 Chronicles 36:23. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. King Cyrus is not quite the anointed, the Messiah that we have come to learn as Christians. Christians focus on the messianic line coming through Jesus. But here in the book, it is thinking of King Cyrus as the one who is going to fulfill God's promise of restoration for Judah. So what do we take from this? Well, we see that this book is telling a different story than I think Christians are trying to tell. But that doesn't make either of them invalid, right? It's a lot about your perspective of who you see as this promised Messiah coming, what is God up to, and is it significant through what God does through Jesus? Me as a Christian am very biased to say that Jesus is the Messiah, the one who brings this more everlasting salvation through us, through his death and resurrection. But God is clearly working through Cyrus as well too, and this whole narrative arc from 1 Samuel and 2 Chronicles. It is a story which tells us and reminds us that reverence for God can be an indicator of success. These passages indicate that success is very much connected with following God. Worshipping anything other than God is labeled as quote unquote doing evil. God then uses imperfect people from any nation to do his bidding, and the actions of leaders often bring consequences upon the nations that they rule. So the leader's actions matter a lot. God blesses, and his blessings can return to those who turn their hearts back to God at any time, and the relationship with God is an ongoing one, where God seeks to keep his promises to those who listen to his voice. So, on that note, may we hear what God has to say in our day and time, and may we act in faith towards this God who is continuing to redeem us even to this day. So, thank you for joining me for this Daily Bread Bible study. I look forward to meeting again next time.